Depending on who you ask, there are three legitimate Super Bowl contenders in this division, of course, excluding the Patriots. But today we want to go through all four teams, talk about who's going to actually get out of this mix and win this division. And of course, we're going to talk about their off seasons and schedule predictions. You guys know the deal. If you've been watching this series on the channel, we're officially halfway through, and this might be one of the most exciting divisions. So I can't wait to get into it. But Amir, you're joining the show. How you doing on this Thursday morning?
I'm doing great.
But for the Buffalo Bills, they won the division last year, and to my understanding, the last couple years, but they lost a lot this offseason. Of course, they have arguably a top two, top three quarterback in the NFL, and that's the most important position. But does Josh Allen have enough help around him? Because we know going into this year, Amir, he's going to have to be Superman. But on defense, you ran into some salary cap issues. You lost Jordan Poyer. You lost Micah Hyde, two all-pro, Pro Bowl level safeties. You lost Stephon Diggs because he wasn't happy here in Buffalo. You lost your starting center and a guy that's been there for like 10 plus years in Mitch Morse. And then you also lost Trey White, which he's had some injuries the last couple of years of his career. So I guess you already kind of know what this team looks like on the defensive side of the ball without Trey White. You drafted Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop. You signed Curtis Samuel. That's your big offseason acquisition. And then outside of that, this is the team that, outside of the Broncos, has the most dead cap space in the league. And that's because of all this star talent you see on your screen that they lost this offseason. So, Amir, your thoughts about the Bills this offseason. Can they continue to be relevant and continue to be contenders, even though they lost a lot of star players this offseason?
So, I kind of brought this up, during the season. Buffalo is kind of similar to Cincy, where it's like, as long as you have your guy, your quarterback, you'll be somewhat decent. Now, I don't know how good they're going to be. I think on paper, this team took a huge step back. Diggs obviously leaving. He struggled last year, but obviously he's leaving. Trey White, it would have been great to have him last year. Personally, I think if Buffalo isn't filled with that many injuries defensively last year, I think they get past KC. And, seeing all those guys officially leave throughout the entire course of a year. And, Buffalo struggled a lot last year, from start to finish. They kind of picked it up towards the end, towards the second half of the year, but it was still times where it's like Buffalo didn't really seem like they were truly legit. And, they got into the playoffs. Obviously they beat Pittsburgh, and that first half against KC, I thought they were going to beat KC. They went ahead and folded. And the fact that all these guys are all going to be gone, the fact that, you're pretty much banking on the fact that a rookie, and Keon Coleman can come out and be this star talent. And, and the fact that on top of that, you're in pretty much all this cap debt and you had to pretty much get rid of all these guys. I'm not sure how good they're going to be. I think, it would literally take for Josh Allen to have to score 40, plus total touchdowns again, 45, plus total touchdowns again, and for him to really play perfect every single game for them to be able to win. So right now, I'm kind of in the middle. I think, they could still be, at the worst, minimum is an 8-win team. At the best, I'm thinking 11 games at the best.
Yeah, I can second that opinion. And I didn't even have Gabe Davis on here. He's another player that they lost this offseason. So they went from a receiving core of Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis to Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel. Let's just say that's a bit of a downgrade there. So Josh Allen, like you mentioned, there is going to have to be Superman this year and play perfect. That's the biggest question for this Bills team for me this year, because this team has had a lot of talent around Josh Allen in the last couple of years where his turnover issues they've been able to fix those, or I guess those turnovers don't have as big of an impact on the game because they have other talent on the field, especially a good defense. This year, you lost a lot. And if Josh Allen continues to turn the ball over at the rate that he has in his career, Amir, I worry that they're not going to have enough talent on the defensive side of the ball and around Josh Allen offensively to bounce back from those mistakes. So ball security is the biggest question for me about this team this year. But, again, like you mentioned, the floor, because you have a top two, top three quarterback, is probably 8 to 9 wins. The ceiling, I might even go 10 wins. But we'll talk about our record predictions here in a moment. Is there anything else you want to touch on about this team before we get into into the record predictions? As year two, now it's going to be the first full year under their new offensive coordinator. Maybe we're looking for a big year from Dalton Kincaid, maybe another big year from James Cook. We saw kind of a different offense here in the second half of the season where it wasn't solely on Josh Allen's shoulders. What are you expecting, or I guess any other questions you want to touch on here before we get into it?
That's the one thing that's somewhat giving the offense hope is the fact that, throughout the year, you know, once they kind of moved on from Dorsey and kind of, demoted his role, you saw a complete offensive shift and they start winning
Yes.
games. You had, James Cook completely balling out. Yeah, Josh Allen only throwing the ball like 15 to 20 times. And they were looking like a legit team. And, I think that's what they're going to have to do is try to bank on the fact that the run game is going to get working. I think they signed Ty Johnson. I don't know how well that's going to help.
Right.
But I think for Buffalo, you're going to really have to make it easier on Josh Allen by running the ball, doing a lot of play action and kind of controlling the tempo each and every game, or else, Buffalo can be in serious trouble offensively.
Yeah, I'm a big Dalton Kincaid fan, so hopefully we get a big year out of Kincaid. Of
Yeah.
course, I was put on by Kincaid when he dominated the Gators a couple years back, week one against the Gators, Utah. Of course, he dominated, and that's when I was put on to Dalton Kincaid. But I'm a big fan of him, and I think he's going to have a big year this year. But again, tough division. You lost a lot. Is Josh Allen enough to get you over the top? Amir, I'm going to kick it over to you. I'm going to kick it over to you to go through your schedule predictions. Here, we're going to go through, of course, just cover your full 18 weeks, and I guess we're going to see where you have them.
Yeah, so for Buffalo, coming out in these first 4 weeks, I had them splitting. Arizona, that's an easy win. I have them beating Jacksonville, but those week 2 and week 4 are going to have them losing, and for the simple fact that,
Yeah.
Even though Buffalo has kind of gave Miami probably the most trouble in the division the past years, I think this year's different. I think Miami's coming out, with the chip on their shoulder a little bit more. The fact that they kind of see Buffalo's down. In talent, also in confidence. I think Miami's going to take advantage of that, for the first Thursday night football game,
Yeah, I
of the
mean,
season.
3 straight primetime games there, weeks 2 to
Yeah.
4. Yeah.
Yeah. And so after that, I had these next 2 games. I had them losing at Houston and then beating the Jets for their, for their first matchup against the Jets. And,
That's a
kind of
tough
similar to
stretch.
last year, when, Buffalo sort of, came on that week 1, they really struggled against that Jets defense, but I think they could squeeze this one out. I think, for Aaron Rodgers and the Jets, it's going to take a little bit of time for them to really, really get going and really get cooking. So, and then after that, I got them rallying off 3 straight. I'm gonna
Yeah.
have them beating Tennessee, going to Seattle, beating Seattle and a tough one. I think Seattle's always tough to play at, but I had them winning that. And I have them, beating Miami to kind of split that divisional play against them. And after that, week 10 and week 11, I had them beating Indy at Indy, a really, really tough game. I had them sort of gaining some confidence, but I had them dropping that confidence and losing to KC, going into the bye week after that. And this is really, honestly, from week 10 to about week 17, this is when it really gets tough. I mean, they
Yes.
have a gauntlet row of games, and this literally reminds me, and we've honestly seen this with a couple teams up to this point. This schedule kind of reminds me of Philly last year. You start
Yeah.
off the season
Yeah.
hot, you have some confidence. The fact that you're going into the bye week 7-4, probably tie, with Miami or the Jets at this point, or somewhat close to it. But
Yeah,
the fact
I
that you
don't think
have
anybody
all
has it
these,
as tough as Pittsburgh, but there's a lot of
yeah,
parity in the league now, and a lot of these schedules seem like gauntlet rows, like you touched on. But
yeah.
but but continue here. Thursday
Yeah,
night
I
or
mean,
Sunday night.
seriously though, like you have all these. I mean, you go at Indy, which I can't believe so many people are overlooking this Indy team. This team is going to be dangerous.
We're high on
Then
them.
you
Yeah.
play, yeah, exactly. And then you play Casey at home. You go to the bye week, and then I mean, it's a good thing you can sort of rest in between that. Philly it was a bit different because last year, I mean, they couldn't really rest. They were kind of just like boom, 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 getting hammered with games and getting beat up. But I mean, you played 3 physical teams. I mean, you play San Fran, then you go to LA, and then you fly from LA to Detroit. And
Yeah.
so I had them, losing against San Fran, barely squeezing the game out against this great Rams team. But then going to Detroit, losing that game. And then I have them, beating New England, losing against the Jets. I think at this point the Jets are going to be rolling. Aaron
Mhm.
Rodgers is going to be rolling. I have them losing or beating New England at New England to end that season off to somewhat make a playoff push and
Yeah, you
finishing
have them
10 and
at
7.
yeah, you have them at 10-7. I'm not going to spoil it and say if that's a playoff picture yet, or if that's good enough to win the division. We'll touch on it here, but just like you, well, a little bit different than you. I have this Bills team getting off to a hot start. I think going into this year, some people might doubt them or undermine them for whatever reason because they lost a lot of talent this offseason. But I think you can, at home, I think you can take care of Arizona. I think you can beat Miami in Miami Thursday Night Football. It's a big statement victory for the Bills. And of course, Miami struggles to beat any competent team. Then you can beat Jacksonville, which shout out to Trevor Lawrence, right? He just got a big bag. And Of course, there's a lot of people. By the way, while we're here, we might as well touch on that. What are your thoughts on Trevor Lawrence getting that big contract there? Of course, there's been a lot of advanced statistics that have come out and said that Trevor Lawrence is the quarterback that has had the most drop touchdowns in his career in the NFL so far. Your thoughts? Would you, if you're the Jags GM, would you have paid him that much money, which is now the richest contract ever?
I was going to touch on the fact that Trevor Lawrence. I mean, even if you watch the tape last year, I mean, Trevor Lawrence had a lot of unfortunate situations, and I think up to this point, Trevor Lawrence, kind of compared to the other top quarterback in the league. I mean, you think about Mahomes, he came in a great
Yeah.
situation. Lamar came in a great situation. Burrow not so much, but the system, the Bengals pretty much did a great job of building around him. And I'm trying to get at here is that this Jacksonville team, this franchise has struggled to really build around Trevor Lawrence, and obviously last year and the year before they've had competent defenses and great defenses, but I mean they've struggled to really surround him with some elite offensive talent, just like these other top quarterbacks have. And so I'm not really mad at it because it's so hard to find a franchise quarterback,
Yeah.
and if you're to move off of Trevor Lawrence, you know, you would pretty much probably be struggling for almost the next decade trying to find, a competent quarterback that can somewhat lead you to the playoffs. And, plus on top of that, I mean, I'm not really mad at it. Just for the simple fact that, I mean, the salary cap is going up every single year. And so it might be from 5, 6 years from now. Trevor Lawrence might not even be a top 10 highest paid quarterback. You never know. And
No.
so,
Yeah.
and so at this point, I'm not really that mad at it.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess at this point, Amir, it was like 2 months ago, probably. We ranked all the 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and we both had them, I think collectively, averaged out. He was a top 10 quarterback for us going into the year. So to me, top 10 quarterback, he's your franchise guy. He's probably the best overall talent you've ever had at the quarterback position in your franchise's history. Go out there, pay your quarterback, right? Like you mentioned, salary cap keeps going up. Go out there and pay your guy, especially because a guy like Tua might get a big contract here this upcoming offseason. And I'd much rather have Trevor Lawrence over a guy like Tua Tagovailoa. But back to the schedule here. You're 3-0. The next three, though, you're on the road in Baltimore, Houston, and in New York against the Jets. No matter how you want to do it, I think they win one of those three games. And then we get into a stretch here, weeks 7 through 9, which these are three teams that can really be really good or they could be really bad, especially teams like Seattle and Tennessee. But I think you're going to win one of those three games. I think, just like you, I have them going into Seattle, winning that one, just because even though they have the home field advantage, I'm going to take Josh Allen and the Bills over Geno Smith and the crew. So, you lose the game against Tennessee. That game could be huge. If you want to have them winning that game, sure. I'm not going to fight you too hard on it. Regardless, you beat Indianapolis in Indianapolis. And this is a game that is going to be huge when we talk about playoff seeding. But there's some other games down the line here that, could sway this either way. We'll get into it though. Kansas City, you lose that one. You go into the bye week at 5-5, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So a mathematical error on my part. But regardless here, you lose to San Francisco Thursday, week 13, Sunday Night Football. You beat the Rams, Detroit, the New England Patriots. You lose to New York, and you win. Basically, what I'm getting at here, because of course I messed up my part of the schedule, so stick with me. You're 10-7, right? You're 10-7 in this division, and to me, that is good enough to be a top 8 seed in the AFC. I'm not going to spoil if they're going to be a playoff team or not, but they're at least really close to it, if not. So let's get into the Miami Dolphins, because I obviously messed up the Bills there, Amir. This is a team that also lost a lot this offseason. They lost Christian Wilkins, of course, a guy that's really emerged into a star-level defensive lineman here in the NFL, true enforcer up front. You also lost Robert Hunt, so you lost a lot of talent in the trenches. You bring in veterans, guys like Calais Campbell and Shaq Barrett. Both of those guys are way past their prime, but I guess they can be okay, right? They can fill the void for you temporarily. You bring in Odell Beckham as well, another guy that's way past his prime. You did draft Chop Robinson. Again, I love Chop Robinson. A lot of people like to talk about J.J. McCarthy in the one game where they played Penn State. And, that's the game where they ran the ball like 30 straight times. You know why they ran the ball 30 straight times? Because nobody could block Chop Robinson, and that's a Michigan offensive line. He's that much of a disruptor. Now, is he going to have that much of an impact at the next level? No, because I don't think anybody's ever had that much of an impact. But you bring in Chop Robinson, you bring in another talented running back like Jalen Wright. The only other big things I want to touch on is the fact that Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are both going to be out a majority of this season with knee injuries. And even when they come back, they're not going to be 100% really for the entire year. And Tua's heading into a contract year. So, Amir, your thoughts on the offseason from the Miami Dolphins here in 2024?
So I thought the offseason was solid. Um, I think them sort of bringing in Calais Campbell. I mean, you pretty much had to, sign a downgrade of Christian Wilkins up to this point in his career. I mean, but you bring in Shaq Barrett to kind of, replace those voids of Phillips and Chubb being out. But I think, that's going to eventually catch up to them. I mean, the fact that you're losing two of your edge rushers, that you pretty much had high hopes for this season, I think is really going to hurt you early in this year, especially when you play against teams that are, really great up front. And so I think, you know, for this Dolphins team, last year, they had a bunch of different offensive line combinations, a lot of injuries up front, but I think this is pretty much Tua's prove year. I think they're pretty much banking on the fact that like, hey, we're gonna go ahead and say, hey, Tua, you have everything you had last year, the same receiving core, plus even better, and we're pretty much banking on the fact that you can prove yourself. And personally, I'm kind of in a weird situation with Tua because 2 years ago, me and you kind of mentioned this, months back, is that, before Tua got the concussions and he got hurt, the Dolphins team looked legit. Tua looked like he could really be a true MVP candidate, be a true franchise guy. And you come into this past year and he's struggling to beat these well competent teams, these great teams. And I think going into this year, Tua has a lot of pressure on him. And for Miami, I think you kind of mentioned this, during draft week was that, Miami probably would have ended up drafting like a Michael Penix or a Bo Nix, but they
Yeah.
all ended up going in like, in the top 15 or whatever, which was crazy. I didn't expect that. I expected somebody like Miami to pick somebody up, sort of, groom them and help, kind of guide them this year and kind of put more pressure on Tua to bring more out of them. And the fact that, Miami is pretty much, putting all their chips on red and saying, hey, Tua, we need you to ball out this year because, I mean, after you, we don't really have a direction to go to.
Yeah, no, we talked about that definitely, and I said Michael Penix would be a perfect fit here, for this Miami Dolphins offense. I thought he was probably a better fit than Tua here in this Miami Dolphins
Yeah.
offense, but like you mentioned, the price of a quarterback is only getting higher, and teams that just paid quarterbacks $180 million, like the Atlanta Falcons, still went out there and drafted a guy like Michael Penix in the top eight, I might add. But interesting offseason. They're definitely doing the most that they can with the cap room that they have and all the injuries that they've had this off or in the last year or so, especially to this defensive line. But they still have a good secondary. They still have this talented offense. And at the end of the day, technically speaking, right? Statistically speaking, I guess if you score more points than the other team, you're always going to win the game. So, like you mentioned, it's a proven year for Tua Tagovailoa. They need to win some big time games, and as long as you have guys like Jalen Waddle and Tua or Tyreek Hill, Tua's always going to look better than he actually is, even if he is a great quarterback. Because you just need to get those guys the ball in space and let them go to work. But this offense, like you mentioned, also is only going to be more dangerous this year. There was a report yesterday that said that Devon Achane is getting reps at receiver. So you now have probably the two fastest receivers in the league, or at least two of the top 10 fastest receivers in the league. And then you throw in maybe the fastest running back on there. You still have Mostert. You bring in Jalen Wright, who ran a 4.4. This offense is scary. And then you have Odell Beckham that you could throw in the mix there as well. Interesting offseason, but like you mentioned, you touched on it perfectly. That's the one sentence that we can sum up this offseason. We're banking on Tua. Go get, if you want that money, go prove it to us. But kick it off here, Amir. You have them starting off pretty hot, just like last year here, but dive into their schedule.
Yeah, so honestly, I mean, these first 5 games, aren't that difficult compared to a lot of other teams. Aside from Buffalo, it's always tough winning in Seattle. But last year, we honestly saw a similar story. Miami was beating up on little teams. They ended up playing great competition and they struggled. And so I think, this year, it's going to be similar to that. These first 5 games, I think they'll beat Jacksonville Sunday night. They match up well against them. They'll beat Buffalo for that first divisional game, a statement game for them because last year, they struggled against Buffalo big time. I think they'll rally off 3 straight to go into the bye week. And, this is as what's really tough about this Miami team. I think the second half, past the bye week, they're going to struggle because the fact that you have a bye week so early and, you're in this tough division. Like up to this point, I mean, you still haven't even played the Jets yet. You still got Buffalo one more time. It's always going to be difficult playing against that New England defense. You have some tougher teams, and so coming up the bye week, I had them losing against Indianapolis at Indy. I have them beating Arizona, then going to Buffalo and losing to split that divisional game. I have them, going to LA, losing against LA. At this point they're in a slump. I have them, after losing these three straight games or whatever, or two straight,
Yeah,
kind of
forget the last
struggling. I
four.
had them right, and so I had them, playing against this Las Vegas team, winning that game, squeezing past the New England defense, kind of building some confidence, and I have them beating Green Bay at Green Bay, which is going to be very tough. And then I have them after that, rallying off four straight. You're playing against the Jets. That's a tough team to beat. You're going to Houston, losing to San Fran, losing to Cleveland. At this point, their confidence is really struggling. They're kind of questioning Tua right now, questioning this team again, just like last year. And I had them going, to New York. At this point, New York, I think they're going to have it clinched, kind of be leading the division. I don't know if they're going to be resting the starters, but I mean, at this point, the Jets are kind of just be playing it, just to, either for a higher seed or kind of just to be playing it. And so I had them, winning this game at New York and sort of, kind of barely squeezing the playoffs or barely falling out. It's going to be on the bridge.
Yeah, 10-7. Again, this division is so tough, because some people will have Miami as the runaway winner, some people have Buffalo, and some could even say the next team we're going to talk about could be the runaway winner in this division. I guess it all just depends on, health is definitely going to play a part in this season. But there's a lot of big questions for every single team. But for me here, it's a little. I guess it's the same result, just different path here. First 5 weeks, I think you can win at least three of these games here. Beating Jacksonville, going to Seattle, beating that one, and going to New England and winning that game. Winning the games you're supposed to win. That's what I want to see out of Tua this year. Because again, when you're facing really tough teams, Super Bowl contending teams, those games, for the most part, are going to go 50-50. For Tua's sake, it's been more so like 10-8 or 10-90, but you want to see him win more so those games this year. For the first 5 weeks, though, you lose against Buffalo. That's going to be your biggest test in the first 5 weeks. You lose that one, so that burns, but also it hurts worse because it is a divisional opponent. But coming out of the bye week with a 3-2 record, you lose to Indy. We're both high on Indy this year, and I think Indy will be a playoff team. But you can beat Arizona. You can split with Buffalo at the midseason mark. You're 5-3, so you're pretty excited if you're a Miami Dolphins fan. We're 5-3 at this point. You're fighting for the division still, and you continue this 2-game win streak. You beat the Rams, the Raiders, the New England Patriots, the Green Bay Packers, and then you're on a 6-game win streak. The same thing you did last year. You're on a 6-game win streak in the middle of the season. You're feeling great if you're a Miami Dolphins fan because at this point, you're pretty much what did I say you were? You were 5-3. You go on a 6-game win streak. What are you at 9-3 or whatever the case may be? This is where it gets tough though, because you literally have 5 Super Bowl contenders to close off your season. Now I'll say this: if the Miami Dolphins do come out and win this division, they're not going to win a playoff game because this stretch here is just like what Philly had to go through last year, where they ran through a gauntlet of teams, a lot of great teams, and as long as those teams are healthy, the Dolphins are going to have a very tough time here closing out the season. I think, if you want to have them winning one of these games, sure, maybe as Browns fans, they'll probably come out and just smoke us by like 40, even though we're home and we have a better defense. If you want to have them winning that Cleveland game or one of the Jets games, sure. But I think 9-8, 10-7 is going to be where they finish this season. Again, either right inside the playoffs or right outside. To me, I think the Dolphins are going to miss the playoffs, but interesting to see what they do with Tua this upcoming off season. I think they're going to be, they're going to be backed into a corner is what I'm getting at. I think they're going to have to pay Tua, even if they have just a mediocre season like 9-8. They might be forced to go out there and pay a guy that they don't really want to pay, at least not at that price tag. But let's get into a team here that we're super high on, especially me. I'm a little bit higher on them than you, unless you've changed a little bit over the last couple of weeks. The New York Jets. I hate that I'm falling into this trap because it is a New York team. New York teams always get a lot of media attention. But to me, that's not the reason why I like this team. To me, I think they filled a lot of voids this offseason. And as long as number 8 is healthy and Aaron Rodgers, I forget he changed his jersey number. As long as he's healthy, I believe in this team, and I think they could be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. They have everything. I'm only worried about their head coach at this point in the season or at this point in the offseason. I want to see him win some big time games. But if they can, and if he's a better coach than I think, then I think this team could be a Super Bowl contending team. As crazy as that might sound. But you go out there and you bring in injury riddled veterans, guys like Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, to shore up this offensive line. You lost. It was a weird transaction here for the Jets because you had a younger Bryce Huff who was only entering his prime, but you decided to trade him to the Eagles instead of paying him, and you trade for Hassan Reddick, who's a proven veteran, but he's 4 years older, and you're deciding to pay him the same amount of money you could have paid Bryce Huff. Regardless, you swap edges here with the Eagles, and you trade for a guy like Mike Williams as well. So you bring in more receiving talent, you shore up this offensive line, you swap edges, and this is where I think they shine the most was in the NFL draft because you bring in Olu Fashanu. He's just if you haven't watched Olu Fashanu, he's just dominant. He's just a dominant tackle, which I think he has the potential to slide inside. Whatever they decide to do with Olu Fashanu, he's dominant. Of course, tackle out of Penn State. Malachi Corley is a receiver who has all the I can't think of the word I'm looking for. He checks all the boxes as far as what you want as a receiver, right? All the intangibles. That's what I'm getting at. He checks all the intangibles, but he's still a raw prospect. We want to see if he can develop. Braylon Allen is a 20-year-old. He's younger than us, Amir, but he's playing in the NFL. Absolutely crazy. And then you bring in Jordan Travis, a guy that is a winner at the collegiate level. He's going to sit behind Rodgers for a couple years, but that's some of their highlights. Outside of that, Rodgers is healthy, and right now he's on a darkness retreat. Outside of that, Amir, what do you think of the Jets offseason?
I thought they had a great offseason, and it's still crazy to me that it kind of took for the Jets to pick up a guy like Mike Williams and go through a whole entire draft people to finally get woken up. And me and you both were saying, once Rodgers comes back in New York, and once AR comes back in Indy, that those two teams are going to make a push in the AFC. And I want to say last week. You brought up a great fact that said that pretty much said 6 new teams are in the playoffs every year.
Yeah.
Which, I didn't realize it was 6, and so this Jets team had an absolutely amazing offseason. And as long as Rodgers can somewhat be healthy and somewhat just not turn the ball over and be somewhat productive, this team is going to win games. And the fact that they won 7 games last year, for all the quarterback struggles, and the fact that they got even better offensively to kind of surround their veteran quarterback, I think this team is going to be great.
Yeah, as much as we never think that because some teams just randomly fall off the face of the planet. Going from a year where they're successful, and then the next year they kind of either go back to mediocrity or whatever the case was, or injuries hit. But I think 8 out of the last 10 years, at least 6 new playoff teams with both conferences make the playoffs. So again, the Jets, I think, are a team that is primed to be one of those 6 teams as long as they can stay healthy. But outside of that, Amir, do you think if this team at full, I guess I'll ask you this, what do you think their ceiling is going into this year? Of course, that is including health as well. This team has everything, but what is your ceiling for them with I guess we're not sold yet on a guy like Robert Saleh, or at least maybe you are.
Yeah, so I think ceiling as far as wins, based off how tough the division is, I say 12 wins, and honestly, the floor I say 10. And I think a successful year for this team will obviously be to make the Super Bowl, but I think their ceiling as far as how far they're going to go will be AFC Championship. I just don't see this
That's
team,
fair.
getting past it seemed like KC. I think KC or even like Cincy. And, I love Rodgers. I think he's arguably the most talented quarterback we've ever seen in our lifetime. And I think for Rodgers, the fact that he's struggled in the playoffs, on those deep runs, in recent history, he's only gotten older. And even though this team is great, this is probably the best receiving core he's had around him, for a long time, and the best defense he's had, on his team. But I think for this team's ceiling, is AFC Championship.
Well, I just want to throw this out there. Just I want to make sure I heard you right. So quick question: who do you think the better team is, the Jets or the Bills?
Oh, the Jets are. Without
Okay,
a
so the
question.
Jets are a better team. Um, so in the playoffs, you're worried about the Bengals and their quarterback. but not the Bills beating the Jets.
Well,
So
the
I just want
Bengals.
to get that
Listen,
out there. I'm a Joe
hey,
Burrow guy.
listen,
You're not.
hey,
So
hey, hey, listen. The Bengals are far greater than the Bills. Look, listen, the Bills. The problem with the Bills is, I'm not high on Sean McDermott. On the way they operate in the playoffs, and the problem that I have with the Bills. I brought up the stats to you the past few years. I mean, the Bills are averaging like I want to say it's like almost 35 points given up, in the playoffs per game, and the Bills get to the playoffs, and the defense folds every single year. The thing about the Bengals is like as long as you have Chase, T. Higgins and Burrow, the Bengals offensively are going to be able to compete no matter what defense it is, and so I think you know the Bengals, the Chiefs, maybe even Houston. I think those three teams are a great threat to stop the Jets.
no doubt about it. I'll start this one off though, because I think that again, I think Rodgers is coming in, and this is going to be a legacy-defining year for him, or at least that's what he's claimed he thinks it's going to be. He still wants to go out there and win one more Lombardi, and he's going to probably have to do it this year because next year some contracts are up and things can get messy. Maybe they have a new head coach next year, so you got to do it this year if you're going to win a Super Bowl or at least go really far in the playoffs. This is the year to do it. So let's get into their schedule. This is a team that is tied for the most, I guess, primetime games this year. I think they have 6 or 7 of them. Absolutely insane, but it's a New York team and they're pretty good. Week 1, though, I think whatever you got to do. I've heard a lot of people joke about this, but don't play Rodgers in this game. The Niners are going to injure him, right? Because they played a fierce pass rush last year against the Bills, and we know what happened. Don't play Rodgers against this Niners team. You're gonna get him hurt. Nick Bosa is probably going to injure him. But even if you do play them, of course, in all seriousness, you're going to lose that game. San Fran is going to come out this year with one goal in mind, and that is to dominate every single opponent and win the Super Bowl. So I think San Fran's going to get off on the right foot. But after that, you start to pick up some momentum. You beat Tennessee, New England, Denver, Minnesota, all games you should win. So you take care of business with 2 primetime games in that stretch. After that, I think you lose 3 straight against quality teams like Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New England. You're facing a lot of tough defenses from week 4 to 8, and I think that's going to catch up with you. But to me, I think after that New England game, it's going to be a good week so you can reset and you go into Thursday night. You beat the Houston Texans, who up to this point have a tough schedule up to this game, and that's going to be the turning point in the season for the New York Jets. You beat the Cardinals. You beat the Indianapolis Colts going into the bye week at 7-4. And Amir, you ready for this? I think you win 5 of your last 6 games against a lot of quality opponents, but these are games that you should win if you're going to be a team that could potentially go to the AFC title game. You beat a lot of these good teams. I'll give the Rams the edge. Maybe if you want to have one of these other teams get the edge over them, I think you win 5 of your last 6, bringing your record to 12-5, taking home the AFC East.
All right, so for the first game for the Jets, Aaron Rodgers hasn't beat San Fran once in his career. And so, the fact that they're
How
starting
the
off
hell
at
that?
San Fran, yeah, which is crazy. I want to say San Fran beat them in the playoffs 3 times. No, it's 3 or 4 times. I can't remember, but so you started the year off at San Fran, on a Monday night game, similar to last year. Rodgers is kind of interesting because last year, obviously, he got hurt in his first game, and then once to the year before that, his first game, you know, in Green Bay to start the year off. I think he lost the game, and the year before that, I want to say he lost that game as well. And so, you're playing against San Fran, who's arguably the best team in the league. Most loaded teams in the league. I think you're starting the year off losing against them. Then after that, I mean, you have 4 games where you match up favorable. I think you're going to rally off 4 straight wins, build that confidence up. After that, I think you'll lose to Buffalo on that first divisional game to kind of still, at this point, you're still kind of finding yourself. I think you'll beat Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh. You'll beat New England with no problem. I think you'll lose against Houston on that Thursday night game. That's a really tough game in a short week. And so I think you go to Arizona, win that game, but then you lose to Indianapolis, and at this point, you're kind of thinking like, all right, just make it to the bye week, and then we can rest our bodies. I think, honestly, their bye week is honestly in a really good spot. The
It
fact
is.
exactly. I mean, at this point in week 12, you can rest, and then you'll end up having like 6 straight games. Where at this point, I mean, they're not that tough. I mean, they're a little tough because of divisional play, but they're not the worst thing in the world. And so, I kind of had the last 6 games similar to you. I had them winning 4 of their last 6 games. Their only loss being against the Rams, because I think the Rams are the only team on this list that can really compete against them at a high level. I had them losing that last game against Miami because they might end up, resting players or end up kind of just,
Getting ready for the
just cruising to that
postseason.
last game of the year.
Yeah, they got a veteran team. So, I mean, they want to be in that spot where they can rest their guys and get a much needed week of rest before the postseason run. But you have them going 11-6. So, of course, we both have them at this point in time taking the AFC East. Maybe, maybe they win the AFC East. I guess we haven't talked about the Patriots yet. Let's get into them. Big offseason for them. And it's really for the simple fact that it is a culture change now. We have known the Patriots to be this dominant Super Bowl winning franchise, really for the last 25 years. But that chapter has come to an end. Of course, Brady left a couple years back, and then now it is Bill Belichick. So the two biggest dominoes that have carried your franchise for 20 plus years are now both officially gone. It is a new chapter in New England. You bring in Gerard Mayo, which is a former player for New England. He's your new head coach, the youngest head coach in the NFL. Of course, it was Sean McVay for like the last 5 years. Now Gerard Mayo comes in as a 36-year-old head coach, the youngest, I think, maybe in NFL history outside of Sean McVay. You traded away your former top 3 overall pick in Mac Jones. You had a good draft. And I'll say this. I think they had a really good draft as far as talent. You bring in Drake May. Of course, he's supposed to be your next big quarterback. Of course, some would argue he's the best overall quarterback in the class. You bring in Jalen Polk, of course, out of Washington, Javon Baker out of UCF. Both of those guys are lighting their training camps on fire, at least at the time of this recording. And then in the 7th round, I think you got a steal with Jaheim Bell. If you haven't watched him, he's super raw, but this is a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", but he runs like a wide receiver. So Jaheim Bell, definitely an interesting prospect there. And then you also brought back, I can't remember if you traded for, you signed Jacoby Brissett. I think you traded for him. Regardless, you brought in Jacoby Brissett. He's going to be your bridge quarterback for whoever decides to take over, whether if it's Drake May or Joe Milton. Any thoughts about the Patriots offseason from you, Amir? Kind of ran through all of it.
Honestly, not much. I think this team is just, kind of in this a tough spot. I'd say that the biggest problem with the Patriots is like they don't really have any star-struck talent to really like depend on in the future offensively outside of Drake May possibly. And obviously you have Javon Baker and Polk, and you have these guys, but it's like they don't really have any true high-end prospects to really depend on in the future. And so I think this team is like years out of really building this team up around Drake May. Defensively they'll always be good. I think because that's kind of the Patriot coaches that they have and obtain. And I'm expecting a big year for Gonzalez defensively. That guy is going to be legit. I think he's a guy who can be a complete lockdown corner, lockdown one side of the field, and it'll completely impact your defense. And so, defensively they'll be good. Offensively, they're in a really tough spot. And this team is kind of just banking off of next year's draft.
I can't remember. So if you remember, please refresh my memory. I know Christian Gonzalez, he was like the runaway defensive player of the year. Or Devon Witherspoon won defensive rookie of the year, right?
No, it was Carter.
It was Javon Carter? Or not Javon Carter. I'm thinking about basketball here, right? Jalen
Jalen
Carter.
Carter. Yeah.
I gotta refresh my memory on that. But Christian Gonzalez was gonna win it, is what I'm getting at
Yeah.
here. He was the runaway in the first month of the season before his injury happened. But this is a team, like you mentioned, doesn't really have a lot of star talent. They changed the head coaching and the quarterback position, which those are the most two important positions on any football team. But outside of that, you're really running it back with a team that was poor last year, to say the least. So I'll make this quick. We're going to run through their schedules, and Patriots fans look away. It's not going to be pretty. To me, again, I think you start off, let's just say I think you get 3 wins along the way. I think a game actually that I do want to highlight is that Week 10 game against the Chicago Bears. Some would say, why do you have them beating a team that is loaded offensively? I think the Patriots historically have always been good at getting under young quarterbacks' skin. The Patriots have one of the best records against young quarterbacks. And that's a game where on the road, maybe Caleb Williams doesn't take the Patriots serious because they come in with 1 win. Whatever the case is, I think they have the veteran defense to get, to take advantage of a young quarterback like Caleb Williams. That's going to be their big highlight win of the year. Maybe that's the first time we get Drake May. Maybe we get Drake May versus Caleb Williams. Interesting matchup there in Week 10, but I have them going 3-14. Amir, I'll speak for you here. It's pretty much the same for you, 3-14, but Is there any game you want to highlight here for them? At least one of their wins?
No, not really. I think this Patriots team is going to be a team kind of like how Carolina last year. Where it's like, you know, despite Carolina being a bad team, there were times where it's like towards the end of the year, you kind of saw their confidence kind of
Yes.
grow, and you kind of saw teams kind of not take them seriously. So I think as the year goes on, you know, they won't win many games, but I think as the year goes on, defensively they'll gain some confidence, offensively they'll gain some confidence, and kind of make games tough.
Yeah. I mean, just like the majority of these videos here, we share very similar outlooks on some of these teams, and I guess that's kind of just a that tends to happen when you talk about football every single week. But very similar records from the both of us here. One win difference with the Jets and the Dolphins. But outside of that, we both have the Jets taking the division. The Bills, and for you, the Dolphins are right on the brink of either making or missing the playoffs. We'll talk about our official playoff predictions here in a couple weeks, but they're definitely on the brink. And of course, we can make some changes to our records along the way as well, depending on if injuries happen or whatever the case is. But episode 184, the last thing I'll touch on here before we get out of here is I should have touched on this at the beginning of the show. So if you're watching, I know you'll actually be coming over to tune in, but on July 1st and July 5th. So the first week of July, it's going to be a very busy week for the channel. You're still going to get your 4 videos a week, 2 fantasy, 2 podcast. But also on that Monday and that Friday, July 1st and 5th at 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm going to be hosting streams on the Bleacher Report app. We're going to be talking about NBA free agency. Of course, big week for NBA free agency that week. But Amir, any last thoughts before we get out of here?
Now, really, hopefully, I can be an NBA podcast this week. I'll let you know. But that's what I'm hoping for, man. I want to start getting on more NBA shows. I love the NBA. I just don't get a chance to talk about it as much, but I'll definitely keep you updated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, next Tuesday we're covering some NBA free agency predictions. So again, if you can make it out, of course, that's also. I mean, it's going to be fun. We already have some news with Pascal Siakam getting signed, and we're going to have some other guys getting re-signed here until next Tuesday. But next Tuesday's NBA free agency. So if you can make it out, that'd be fun. But until then, that's it for the show. So stay happy, stay healthy, and of course, join those BR live streams. Of course, the more of you guys show out, the more money I get paid.